I have for you today a new take on Goryo's Vengeance. Okay, so the Goryo's Vengeance modern archetype has been around for a few years now. It hasn't changed all that much. The idea is to get a Gristlebrand or an Emrakul into play with haste and attack your opponent. Normally, that will be enough to close out the game. But now there's actually another way to get one of those big creatures into play, and it starts with a new card from Aether Vault, and that is Kari Zev's Expertise. Okay? So you look at the Kari Zev's Expertise and you may think, wait, why is there a threat in your Goryo's Vengeance deck? And that's a great question, but there is a good answer, and that is we're playing a card from Dragon's Maze, okay? So it's a split card that you can fuse, and that is breaking and entering. So you can cast it for one half of the card or the other, or you can cast them both together. So in this case, the first half of this card is breaking. So either you can target either player, put 8 cards into your graveyard from your library, and then the other part of it is for 6, you can put a creature into play from either graveyard and give it haste. And it's under the battlefield under your control. Okay? So you can then, for 8, you can hard cast both sides of the card. So what you can do is you put 8 cards into your graveyard, then oftentimes you get a Gristlebrand or an Emrakul back, you give it haste, and then unlike Through the Breach or Goryo's Vengeance, that big legendary creature, it stays in play. It doesn't just get exiled at the end of your turn. So with the Expertise, rather than paying 8 mana for that fuse, you're just paying the 3 mana for the Expertise, and you can cheat this card into play as if it costs 2. Okay? Don't ask me how it works like that. Doesn't really make sense to me. I'm sure it makes sense to some people, but that's how it works, okay? You can play the Breaking and Entering off the Kari Zev's Expertise for 2 mana, alright? And so besides that, we're just a standard Grixis Goryo's Vengeance deck that's still doing some pretty amazing stuff. So the mana base is straightforward. Other than there's 2 Forbidden Orchards in the mana base, and so Forbidden Orchard, it's a land that you can produce any color of mana, but your opponent then gets a 1/1 Spirit. But guess what? It's actually sometimes good for your opponent to have a creature because you need to have a target for your Kari Zev's Expertise. So there's some decks in Modern that don't play any early creatures at all, and so sometimes you're left with this Expertise in hand with nothing to target, which is pretty frustrating. So that's why there's a couple of Forbidden Orchards in the deck. We've also got our card draw, so we need to find these combo cards. We need to have either a Goryo's Vengeance or Through the Breach, or a way to get the Breaking and Entering going, plus a big creature. So you need multiple cards in order to win. Essentially, you need a big creature in the graveyard or in hand, and then you need a way to get it into play. And so Serum Visions, it helps you dig to these types of cards. Faithless Looting, it's another card draw effect, but it also puts cards into your graveyard, which is important because of the Goryo's Vengeance. You need to be able to put a Gristlebrand or Emrakul into the graveyard in order to get it back, of course. And so one thing you can do with the looting is cast Faithless Looting. Say you're discarding an Emrakul, right? So you discard the Emrakul, then it's about to get shuffled into your library, your whole graveyard, because that's what happens when Emrakul goes to the graveyard. But that trigger does go on the stack. So you're able to respond to the trigger and cast Goryo's Vengeance, get that Emrakul back with haste, annihilate your opponent, and so you're able to do that all with that shuffle trigger on the stack. You're able to get that Emrakul into play. So we've also got a few more discard outlets here. Collective Brutality, it's a discard outlet. It's also a staple in Modern now. So this card is in a lot of black decks in Modern. And the Escalate in this deck is almost a bonus because we want to be putting those big creatures into the graveyard. Cathartic Reunion, similarly, it's a card draw effect that is able to put these big creatures into the graveyard, but you don't draw the cards first. You have to pay the cost for the Cathartic Reunion before you draw the cards, which can be a little bit annoying in case, say, you cast the Cathartic Reunion and then afterwards you draw into that big creature, which you would have wanted to be in the graveyard. So there's 4 copies of Simian Spirit Guide to sort of speed the deck up, make it a turn 3 combo deck, or a turn 2 combo deck, or a turn 4 combo deck. You don't really want to be waiting until turn 5 to cast your Through the Breach and getting your big creature into play. So then there's also, of course, 4 of each of the fatties. So the main deck is pretty tight, but after board, you do have to dilute your deck a little bit to make room for some of these sideboard cards, and because your opponent's going to be boarding in hate cards, so like discard spells, graveyard hate, counter spells. There's a lot your opponent may have access to after board that you have to be ready for. Okay, so these counter spells are primarily to counter your opponent's counter spells to help you force through one of your ways to get one of these creatures into play. There's a couple of fatal pushes. Thoughtseize is another way to give yourself perfect information, so you can nab that hate card or that counterspell out of your opponent's hand before going for your big play of the game. Vandal Blast, it's a one-of. It's for artifacts and for artifact decks in general. Painful Truce it comes in against the mid-range decks that have a lot of discarded counterspells, so you really need ways to gas back up and have multiple plans of attack, not just be all in on one Goryo's Vengeance, one Through the Breach. You have to be able to go long, and Painful Truce helps you do that. Anger of the Gods is good against the small creature decks. Yeheni's expertise is very similar to the Kari Zev's expertise in that it helps you cheat in the Breaking and Entering. And so you're basically trading a 3-mana Threaten for a 4-mana -3/-3. And then there's also 1 copy of Murder Scut. So this is the list. It's been putting up some solid results on Magic Online, and I'm excited to play more with it. The new combo is pretty sweet, and the deck, even before the expertise plus Breaking and Entering, still a really fun deck to play in Modern.